Hi there. What do we mean by civilization? More importantly, what do I mean by civilization? It's the progress of human societies from hunters, gatherers and scavengers to organized people who develop technology to improve their health, safety and comfort. Sure, those benefits have so far been at great cost to everything else on Earth. But better to have spectacles, penicillin and microwave ovens than live to an average of, 35 years in a lifetime of suffering and hardship. Suffering and hardship are the way for the rest of the animal world, and I, for one, want no part of it. David McMillan here. When you have too much to deal with, just drift away and press the reset button. Today I thought just such a button might be a 15-20 minute splash outlining all of human civilization. And what's that, civilization? Well, time's short, so let's cut to the chase. Let's say civilization starts from around 6,000 years ago, when the first groups of people in the Middle East and China created settled towns with shelter, keeping animals and growing their own crops. To 2 billion years of complex life on Earth, I didn't mean all those single-cell non-entities, a branch of warm-blooded mammals, primates, evolved into hominins. There were many types, but most died off, probably with some help from us. Understand this. Evolved doesn't mean one type of creature grew extra features or changed because it was better for them. That doesn't happen. The word evolved is misleading. It was simply that every other kind, except the survivors, was killed. Like, as an example, if we lived in a land where the only safe place from predators was, say, a 3 foot by 2 foot hollow in a tree, nowhere else, then we'd all be either dwarves or dead, because only the dwarf lives to breed in such a world. There's no changing, no adapting body parts or our brains to better survive. Death is the driver for different species. But on Earth, 200,000 years ago, there were many ways to die. And if you weren't one of us, you're a dead man. From a tribe of under 10,000, it's been estimated, in Central East Africa, 190,000 years passed, with nothing exceptional happening except that pockets of humans became isolated around the world. In these pockets, the people faced different environmental pressures which drove their fashion sense and preferences, pushing out all who didn't fit. That led to all the different group appearances around the world, most of which we still have today. They're called races by some, and whatever a race really is at a technical level. But whatever you think, enjoy those variations while you can. In a few centuries, you won't be able to tell if someone belongs to a race. And that won't be just because of mixing. I mean, who knows what we'll look like when DNA tweaking will run to fashion's whims. We'll choose what we look like. Okay, let's move on. Here's an odd thing. According to the record, and it's likely to be correct, no farming, no agriculture, stone buildings, or anything you'd name civilization came from what are anatomically modern humans, that is us, for over 190,000 years. The first Copper Age, stone houses, crops, animal breeding, all of that appear in China and Jericho in the Middle East and spots in Anatolia, that's Turkey today. Not much further than around 8,000 years back. What happened for all that time before when we were supposedly we? Bad weather? Stomach upset? Those who came out of Africa as modern humans clearly were many generations from the people of the Middle East or China. But what made the change in behaviour? Over at least 100,000 years wandering around the world, forming thousands of tribes who isolated themselves enough so they looked very different, yet none of them made the leap from stone tools to pottery and farming until, well, recently, really. And then bang, almost all at the same time, yet spread from Egypt to the biblical lands to China, people were getting technical. And what gives? Why then? And not for all those thousands of years before. Alien visits? Gotta be. Just a minute. Apparently it was the weather. It settled down and we had time. Crops grew. Suppose so. Well, you tell me. If you have a theory as to why metal tools for scraping, cutting and killing kicked off around the same time all around the world, let me know. Just don't bring the flood into it, even though most religions have a flood story. By the way, I found this crazy YouTube channel where some, what would you call them, Christian entertainers have made a near life-sized Noah's Ark, well, a set of one, complete with bogus cages for housing the animals, even little things for moths and butterflies. I think they go for baby dinosaurs to get around the size issue. Yeah, those Genesis-type Christians believe that there were dinosaurs, but they sort of died off in recent times. Anyway, oh yeah, they had some clay jars of water storage. That looks pretty impressive. But back to the real world. There's an equally impressive 12,000-year-old site in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. It's some kind of a hill. And there are these great circular stone monoliths with strange animal carvings. It's huge. Must have taken a lot of effort. But, again, is this civilization? No, not yet. The food in the area must have been plentiful, but there's no sign of those people doing any farming, breeding animals, and no towns at all. Though I suppose if they had huts of wood, it wouldn't have left much in the way of remains, I guess. No pottery, so I won't count anything as civilization without pottery. Again, nothing much happens for nearly 6,000 years, well, nothing that leaves a stone record. But then we have Jericho and Catalhayok, and not long after, towns in Mesopotamia. The word means between the rivers, in this case Tigris and Euphrates, Iran and Iraq. Stone buildings, pottery, yay. Streets, keeping and breeding animals, all good. Civilization has arrived. Why? I'll tell you. Food, extra food. And how did that happen? Well, there were two kinds of grasses across the area that were selected to make emmer and einkorn wheat, just two very important types. Wheat begat flour, and when cooked bread, and when brewed beer. Suddenly, Le Weekend was born, extra time, because it kind of industrialized in a pathetic little way the food gathering process. Same thing even earlier over in Hunan, China, but with rice cultivation in that case. And let's not forget another local area bit of luck, an important one. Tame, slow animals like the ox, sheep and goat. Ox bred to the cow and plenty of milk. The chicken didn't reach Europe from Asia for another 4,000 years. But that could have been a blessing, disease-wise. The point is, to jump out of the rut of hunter-gatherer, you need useful animals and the right seeds. And just about everything else we can figure out. Clay left by the fire equals pot, easy. Glittering pretty rock with a low melting point ore equals copper. If there are lots of food fires, that will happen almost by accident or bored experiment over that long weekend. By contrast, look to the peoples of North and South America. No horses, no sheep. And I don't know if you can milk a bison, although probably a llama if you don't mind being spat at. Alpaca spit is not phlegm, by the way, it's bacteria-laden stomach contents. Yeah. No wonder civilization camped out in the Americas. I'm thinking they were probably lactose intolerant. They certainly can't handle the firewater. Now let's move on. You know about the Egyptians, the Sumerians, all the kinds of Hittites and Israelites. And remember those seafaring traders, the Phoenicians? They're along today's Lebanon, or they were. They probably shipped in the first chickens. And we use much of their alphabet even today. Minoans, pretty people. By 4,000 years ago, all's going well. The rarer metal tin is mixed with copper to give hard-edged bronze to make a decent chisel or sword. Somehow they worked out how to use arsenic before that, but didn't have a happy ending. Tin you need to mix with copper, just a little bit. Okay, so there was some iron smelting in China about the same time. I learned too of the Harappan culture in Pakistan from going back, it was going back 5,000 years around the Indus River. I saw a 4,000-year-old dentist drill tucked up in a little museum, though I had to go back to Karachi to find a good dentist. I don't know what they used for filling. I wonder whether they had that, you'll think of it, it's kind of natural gum. Anyway, dentistry around 4,000 years. As I say, things were all going well. No, not for long. It all turned to shit around 1200 BC, that's just over 3,000 years back. A dark age descended on most of the civilized world at the time. Records of the sea peoples invading, towns burned, crops destroyed. Warfare, was it? Mostly, but perhaps some bad weather too. We all live by the grace of a few degrees. Another 500 years before civilization is picking up again, centered this time on ancient Greece. China was unaffected in that mini-dark age. The Zhou dynasty near continuous, I think, for 700 years. The ox-drawn plough, crossbow and horse riding were all in use there, as well as large-scale irrigation. There's always some place to live, no matter how bad things get everywhere else. So, are we yet on an irreversible trajectory to the modern age, here at the dawn of the Roman Empire? Is there any slipping back? Well, all the major religions are established, although the Jewish sects of Christianity and Islam have yet to split and do their bit to hold back the world. But let's not make too much about religions. Very few people actually act on their religions, except when it suits them. And while almost no good comes from any of them, the bad stuff is actually in our own natures, regardless of a supposed creed. I'll compress the last 2,000 years. What's to say about ancient Rome you don't already know? Good roads, mass transport, mostly those grain ships from the Nile Delta in Egypt, decent plumbing, effective coinage, water wheels, and war refined, inspired by the brief but lasting career of Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king from 2,300 years ago, who fought with his army to the edges of India. Alex learned a lot from his dad Phil. He really soaked that up, how to slim down the baggage train. You know well an army marches on its stomach, so your supply lines are more important, really, than the battles. He used to drop off around 4,000 troops and their followers from his armies of 50,000, 60,000 strong. establishing garrisons and cities along his way. I saw the eroded remains of a few Alexandrian cities in Afghanistan in the 70s. Not much to see. Mud brick walls don't last, but the culture did, with descendant kingdoms in Bactria, which rather joined up the world from Asia. That Silk Road. Despite all the interesting stuff, we must wait for technology to take hold before true civilization advances. And it's a long wait. Even as Rome crumbled in the West 1,500 years ago, all that organization didn't provide a kickstart to modern times. The empire held on and grew in the East, with Constantinople on the Bosphorus at what became Istanbul, while Rome declined from 1 million citizens at its height of being entertained with bread and circuses to a weedy ruin of just 25,000 people after the fall, cows wandering around the Colosseum. Constantinople was the richest city in the world around 500 AD. Okay, there was a major setback in 536 with a volcanic eruption in Iceland that darkened the skies for 2 years, killing crops, followed by a major plague that killed a third of the population before spreading throughout Europe. There was recovery, loss of empire, followed by recovery. Emperor Heraclius clawed back most of it after a Persian war. Grain flowed again from Egypt. Jerusalem was restored, with Heraclius barefooted, carrying the true cross, yes, I know another one, back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in 629. Unfortunately for him, just about broke as he was, the normally warring Arab tribes had been unified by Islam, so the usual payoffs to keep them fighting each other weren't available. Those early Arab generals would take most of the East in the next 100 years. I'm not really too sure how religious they were, despite what later generations say. The Umayyads certainly lived well. Anyway, Byzantium, the new Rome, held, but just. Now, as interesting as all this stuff is, almost 1,000 years pass, half of Europe in an age, a dark age again, before something changed. What made the change? What brought about the age of Enlightenment and the beginnings of the world we know as ours? Printed books. I'm sure of it. The Romans didn't have them, possibly due to the lack of elasting ink. Paper had been around for almost 2,000 years, with woodblock printing and some movable type since about 1000 AD. That was during the Tang dynasty. It didn't spread instantaneously. The idea was around. But there, China's rigid bureaucracy was not the place for an information revolution. Conditions only came together in the late Middle Ages in Europe, mainly France, Britain, Italy, and Germany, with books, reading, and education. It was not restricted to the priestly caste or the rich elite. And England happened to be perfectly placed for an industrial revolution after our own civil wars had ended. Wealthy traders, a growing reliable navy, peace in the land. The age of steam would arise from the first simple steam pumps used to drain water from mine shafts in 1730. Was it the O'Connell engine? Oh, you'll think of it. Our Western world would become the dominating power, and there's been no turning back. Sure, some clashes and horrors of the 20th century. We know them, we love them, with 2 world wars. But we made it, and haven't nuked each other yet. Will the power shift? I suppose I really mean, will China win, bringing a totalitarian state with it? No, not a real chance. Why? Well, since we're talking about civilization, we must remember this. When it comes to fighting dirty, being underhanded, and tricking the enemy, You can't beat the most civilized countries in the world, ours, because the enemy will never see it coming. Damn, I forgot one of the most important historical events of modern times. Forget Nobel Prize winners. Let's always remember that we honour our great and good in unexpected ways. I might forget about our moon landing, but I'll keep in my heart that Arnold Ziffel won 3 Patsy Awards in the 60s too. Hail, Arnold the Pig. And if your foreign devil doesn't get that, he won't win. Until next time.